fighting orphans of the Pacific? House tricks. This is after her weekend, Annie, back on the air strictly under UN hours. Reception okay? Well, it better be, because this is all request night. And I've got a pretty nice program for my favorite little family, the wandering boneheads of the Pacific Islands. The first request is made by none other than the boss. And guess what? He wants Bonnie Baker, and my resistance is low. Now, what taste you have, sir, she said.
That was the voice of Iva Toguri. Of all of the important figures of World War II, Iva's name may not ring any immediate bells. The name Tokyo Rose, however, is one of the most notorious names from the time. The myth of Tokyo Rose followed a Japanese siren of the airwaves who would hypnotize soldiers with her voice as a way to destroy their morale. While there were many instances of the Japanese government spreading anti-American propaganda in an effort to damage morale, there never really was anybody who went by the name Tokyo Rose. The story of Iva Toguri cannot be told without acknowledging her connection to the Tokyo Rose myth, and how it turned the way people viewed her role in the war from secret hero to traitor. This is how she became the orphan of the airwaves. In 1898, a man named Jun Toguri immigrated to Los Angeles from Japan, where he would meet and marry a fellow Japanese immigrant named Fumi. The two would become the parents to a first-generation Japanese-American daughter, who they named Iva Ikuko Toguri. Ironically enough, Iva was born on July 4th of 1916. As a first-generation American, Iva was fully integrated, never calling any other place besides America home. Iva fully embraced the American lifestyle. She followed all the fads that American girls in the 20s and 30s enjoyed, she believed in Christianity, and proudly registered herself as a Republican. In her teenage years, she had a particular love for pop and swing music. In 1940, Iva graduated from UCLA and earned her degree in zoology. The day after her 25th birthday, Iva left for Japan to tend to a sick aunt. Lacking a passport, she was issued a certificate of identification from the US government. It was enough to get her into Japan for just a short period of time. After spending a few months with her aunt, she asked the vice consul in Japan to issue her a passport in order to return to America. This would get clogged in bureaucracy for a long time, until it finally grinded to a halt as Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. As many Americans living in Japan during the Pacific War were, Iva was pressured by the Japanese government and her Japanese relatives that she had been living with to revoke her American citizenship. This was completely out of the question for Iva.
I was living with my aunt until such time that it became a little uncomfortable for them because I was not a native Japanese citizen, and they were harassed. You can either become a Japanese citizen because you are Japanese, or we can take you into the intern. So I said, well, intern me. And they talk it over and they say, well, no, it costs money to feed you 3 times a day, so you just go on your own.
As punishment, she was declared an enemy alien. As a result of her status, Iva would be refused a ration card and needed to find work desperately. Her love of music drew her to Radio Tokyo, where she would find work as a simple typist. In an effort to spread anti-American propaganda, the Imperial Japanese government began to force English-speaking Allied prisoners of war to perform radio news shows that focused solely on bad news. Since she was an enemy alien with no discernible Japanese accent, Iva was chosen to take part of the 0 Hour, an hour-long news and entertainment propaganda show. Her producer was Australian Army Major Charles Cousins. It was up to Iva to pick the music and take requests from prisoners of war to play during the show.
John, I mean tongue. Help you relax. All set? Okay, here's the first blow at your morale. Hey, Kaiser, singing and singing. Hey, Pop, I don't want to go to work. Please be listening.
Iva had just one condition. She would never broadcast any anti-American propaganda from her own mouth, and this was something that Major Cousins agreed to. True to his word, the Major never gave her a script that would make her seem as though she had turned her back on her home country. On air, she went by the name Orphan Ann. She identified herself as an orphan and her listeners as her fellow orphans of the Pacific. With the help of Major Cousins, she began to subtly mock the Japanese imperial government, which, when hidden with English nuance, went largely unnoticed. With what little money she had made at the radio station, she was reported to have smuggled extra food rations into the POW camps she frequently visited for work purposes. In April of 1945, she married a fellow person of Japanese ancestry declared an enemy alien, Portuguese citizen Felipe d'Aquino. In America, the name Tokyo Rose was used as an anti-Japanese propaganda tool to warn of the dangers of anti-American propaganda. In the time of America's involvement in World War II, the Japanese were targets of race-based hate. Even though America was also at war with Germany and Italy, the German and Italian people were white. The two nations also had figures like Hitler and Mussolini as villains that people could rally against. Japan lacked a figure like that, so the Japanese people themselves were portrayed in horribly offensive ways. They were treated like subhumans. Tokyo Rose, and by extension Iva, was depicted as a calculating and seductive villain, a racist caricature, or both, in things like military training videos.
The voice of truth.
Get Tokyo Rose.
Reaches out to you from the peacefulness of Japan, laden as always with love, but today.
Hollywood films, and children's cartoons. Following the surrender of Japan in September of 1945, the FBI searched the island nation for its most wanted war criminals. Tokyo Rose was one of them. There were around 9 or so women who did what Iva did during the war, but none of them actually went by the name Tokyo Rose as their on-air persona. The INS offered $2,000 for an interview with this so-called Tokyo Rose. For Iva, that was over a full year's salary, and that would tempt anyone. And feeling as though she fit the description for the misnomer, she stepped forward and took the offer, but instead, she was arrested. After an intense investigation, she had no incriminating evidence of treason against her. Completely innocent, she requested to return to America once again after she became pregnant with her first child. The child would unfortunately die from tragic complications at birth. Due to lingering anti-Japanese sentiment, popular gossip columnist Walter Winchell targeted Iva and garnered enough public interest to bring her to trial for treason. During her trial, Iva was found guilty of 1 count of treason and not guilty of 7 counts. It would later be said by key witnesses that they were threatened and coached by the FBI to testify against her and claimed to have committed perjury during the trial.
You stuck a knife into the USA. You forgot what they learned you at UCLA. I'll bet you're sorry now, Tokyo Rose. Sorry for what you've done.
After everything she did to prevent betraying her country, as thanks, her country betrayed her. Although her blood was Japanese, the heart that pumped it was American. With the passage of time, Iva Toguri is recognized as an unsung hero of the bloodiest war in human history. In 1976, she received a full presidential pardon by Gerald Ford. The World War II Veterans Committee recognized her efforts and awarded Iva the Edward J. Hurley Citizenship Award, making special care to note her indomitable spirit, love of country, and the example of courage she has given her fellow Americans. A hatred towards Japanese Americans fueled the fires that sent a real American hero to jail. Iva continuously risked her life for the sake of the pride she felt for her nation. Even after everything she went through, she happily spent the remaining years of her life on American soil. The name Orphan Anne was fitting. Iva was considered an enemy in her ancestral home. The place she grew up, her favorite place in the world, was rounding up everyone of Japanese ancestry and placing them in internment camps. If she had stayed in America, she would have ended up in a prison. When she finally returned to America, she was placed in a prison anyway. Orphan Anne didn't really belong anywhere. Iva Toguri was someone who truly believed in her country. She is one of the most important Asian American women in history due to her efforts in strong patriotism in spite of being presented every opportunity to hold a grudge against the United States. Her presidential pardon was an important step in repairing the damages to Japanese American women during World War II. It's incredibly fortunate and comforting knowing that Iva's story will not be forgotten and that she is getting the credit she deserves. Her story should be shared more, as the stories of important Asian American women in U.S. history are few and far between.
Who did you want to win the war?
There's no question about that. I wanted the United States to win. I mean, there was no question about it. I mean, what would I know about Japan? The only country I knew was the United States. I'd only been in Japan a few months.
Iva Toguri lived to be 90 years old.